Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Chris Hanna Show. I am so excited today. This has taken me a long time to track this guy down, to really get him to actually fill out the link to be on my podcast. But I am excited to welcome my friend, fellow entrepreneur, business owner, Keith Makse, to the podcast. Keith started focusing on real estate investing in 2018 with multiple strategies. And in 2020, he really got known as kind of this guy and this expert in the short term rental space. Since then, Keith has grown his business through arbitrage and management and co-hosting opportunities. Keith and his team operate short-term rentals across Ontario, Alberta, and Arizona. So he's across the border in multiple locations. And he is known on Instagram as AIRBNB Keith. So Keith, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Chris. I'm super excited to be here. I know we've been trying to get this happening for a long time. Before I go any further, I'm going to just turn on my light because I'm realizing I didn't do that. And I like to look pretty for the camera. And
That is an important thing, right? The great lighting and stuff that you have.
yeah, I don't think it really did much. So,
No.
there's only so much you can do with this.
That's true. You're working with a limited thing there, I guess. So I want to just dive straight into it here, man. Like, so the last couple of years, obviously, it's been real estate has been the primary focus, but
hmm
you've kind of had a bit of this entrepreneurial side to you for a while. I'm
hmm
curious if you can just kind of share a little bit more of kind of what your journey was. Like, how did it, go from where you were to eventually in real estate the last couple of years? What's that been like in a short and concise way?
Okay. I'm going to jump, and I'll keep it short and concise. I'm going to jump all the way back to grade 7.
Okay.
When I was in grade 7, I remember we were talking about career paths, opportunities in front of us. And, the guidance counselor, I went to school. I mean, there were 100 kids, maybe 80 kids, I don't know, altogether. And I remember receiving the sheet of, hey, here's some potential paths, like when you're going into grade 8 and then you're going to graduate and go into high school, and what am I going to do there? So you're starting to think about these things. And I remember looking at careers, and it gave me a list of like 50, nurse, doctor, lawyer, taxi driver, garbage man. And it's like, this has none of the things that I'm interested on here. How do people like make shoes, make computers, make video games, right? And I was asking these questions. They're like, I don't know, just choose one off of that list. I don't want to. And so all of a sudden I was already questioning the system of being put into a box and not being able to think outside of that box. And so
Right.
I recognized, like, I want to do things that aren't on here. I don't need to listen to this. Like, I'll just move on. And it gave me that sort of that idea that, you know what, like, why do I want to work for somebody else? I also had that same idea of, why do I want to work for somebody else? Why don't I become my own boss? It'll be great because that way I don't have to answer to people. I can be independent and follow my own path. So, as I've told you before, I'm one of the most fireable employees.
Yeah,
Um,
we have that in common.
because I don't necessarily want to follow all the systems and processes that are in place. I think systems and processes are very important, but when you all of a sudden put these bumpers and parameters and put me into a box, I have nothing but the desire to like break right out of it and do other things. So I years ago, I started off in the video game industry, and then after a few years, I kind of got out of it. But it was the lure, the idea of high tech, and just where my brain was. I remember, goes back to when I was 5 years old. I was walking. I'm going to date myself now. I was walking through the mall, and they had these newfangled boxes with screens on it. I went up to it and I saw it was asteroids and space invaders.
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh my gosh." And for whatever reason, that just made my brain go, "That's what I want to do."
Right.
So then I spent, once I started in sort of the video game community, I was working in there for about 20 years. However, I really was only employed for about 3 to 5 years with, yeah, about 5 years with different studios, but most of the time I was actually running my own studios. So I was an entrepreneur already, like creating a studio, creating teams, putting them together, putting concepts together,
Were
applying
these like
for,
console games or they phone games, or what kind of games are we talking
yeah.
here?
Uh, Good question. They were everything. So I started
Okay.
off making console games. I actually moved on to mobile phones. I moved into uh, casual games for like women who are over 40. I moved into virtual reality is where I kind of ended my journey. So I've touched everything, and I've been on console multiple times
Yeah.
and did all these things. So I got to experiment and play with a lot of technology, and the mobile phone space. I really understood that space. Not that I'm a data analyst or a data miner, but I recognize the value of all that data that goes into it. So coming up to kind of jumping into today is now Airbnb to me is there's so much in relation of what I found in the mobile game space. That's why I actually gravitated my real estate journey, eventually landing into short-term rentals because I'm still looking at a lot of data. I'm looking at the analytical tools, uh, the search engine optimization of your listing description and getting the right photos, and then what you're doing and manipulating in the background in order to get as popular as you can. So there's a lot of relations there that I realized that this is my niche that I really want to fulfill.
Well, so is it fair to say then, like in the short-term rental space, like you talk about the analytics with it and then like the technology, is that the strategy in the real estate side where like that it just it naturally you gravitated towards it because of that, or like what pulled you into that space? Like what was that about short-term rentals? Because you tried different strategies, I know that.
Yeah, I've wholesaled, I've flipped, I actually still have some long-term buy and holds. So, but it was one of the buy and holds that I actually had. So I was going through a lot of self-education, just Professor YouTube was teaching me a lot.
Yeah.
And between real estate, buying and owning and flipping and everything else, but I also started researching short-term rentals. So when I had a house that I was living in a residence, I was going to convert it into a rental, but I realized I want to try short-term rentals. This seems like it's an easy fit. It checked all the boxes where I could understand how much I was going to make using tools like AirDNA. I had a good idea. Of course, I've blown those numbers out of the water year after year, so I'm very happy with that. But on the other hand, I also was sort of operating out of fear. I didn't want to have a long-term renter. I didn't want somebody coming in and damaging the place and barely like getting a couple $100 to get by. I didn't want somebody coming in and all of a sudden stop paying rent. And thank goodness, because 1 week after I launched my house as an Airbnb, that's when we had a lockdown.
Mm.
And I saw so many other people who were like, when you had the premier of our province come out and say, "Hey, if it came down to eating food with my family or paying rent, I know what I would do," says the fattest guy.
Right.
So, it's kind of like I had that fear going into it in advance, and it only got worse with the pandemic. So I was glad to separate.
Well, how much do you think like the pandemic just forced you to really change your perspective as an entrepreneur, as a business owner? Like what was the major pivot or lessons that you kind of picked up during that whole process?
I think what I realized is that a lot of people get into short-term rentals thinking of vacation rentals, going to a cottage, people who are traveling for personal reasons. But what I realize is even though there are personal, people think of personal as in vacation fun. But people are traveling because they're doing renovations, there's insurance work on a property that needs to be done. People are traveling for funerals, weddings. People are traveling for medical appointments, whether it's for themselves or an entire family traveling because they're there to support another family member. I realized that out of short-term rentals, like vacation rentals are just a small subsection or niche of short-term rentals. Short-term rentals are needed by so many people. And then all of a sudden I started getting all these people who are traveling for work. And I realized like there's even two different types of people who travel for work. You have your sort of your executive sales team who are traveling and they want to have a really nice place to stay, or you get your more blue collar team that's traveling and they're trying to just cram as many people into one place as possible and they want to save money on hotels. So there's both like benefits to both. And I think it's just fantastic that like I've been able to clue into the fact that short-term rentals fill so many different niches and I can actually cater to them across different platforms and across different like what I call OTAs, online travel agencies. Airbnb is just one, but then I can create my listings to appeal to different groups as well.
Like when you first started down this path, could you have ever imagined, or was it part of the goal that you were gonna have it, the business in multiple, not only just cities, now at this point, multiple countries? Like, did
Yeah.
you think that was the goal, or were you thinking, I'll just pick up a couple properties and try to do this short-term rental thing and try and just get into real estate kind of investor? Like, did you know it was going to get to where you are, to ultimately where you still want to go?
No, it was totally I was totally in a different mind space at the time. My goal was still to acquire a property, do a duplex conversion, put a long-term renter into the basement, and then Airbnb the top floor, so I can have stable rent plus volatile rent.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that banks are a challenge with dealing with in terms of mortgages, and then you have insurance, and then you have even the CRA, the LTB. There's all these different moving parts that you have to pay attention to. So I thought, okay, I just want to buy the equity and the value of the home, and then, create additional cash flow. That's all I was looking for, and I really wanted to focus on that property. Um, but it took me a lot longer than it probably should have to kind of pivot and say, I don't need to own the property in order to capitalize off of it. I just control the asset. I don't even own the asset. And
Right.
through controlling of the asset, I get to actually, make profits from it. So
What do you
that is a huge difference.
what do you think helped like contribute to like the mindset shift and the change? Like, I know you're someone who's invested a lot in yourself, in terms of whether it's coaching, it's mentorship, like attending events that you would do, in different
Mhm.
spaces. Like, is that what's contributed to kind of opening up your mindset, or is it just like building like the network of people around you and seeing what others have done? Like, what really started to help contribute to that real shift? Because it is a big shift.
Yeah, it is. So the biggest shift that really started taking place was when I realized like somebody had pointed out like mentorship should really be about finding that person that you gravitate to. I think it was Alex Musatea. Actually, I'm going to give him kudos to this, and he was on your show recently. He said that mentorship really is great when it's provided by somebody who's doing what you want to do, but they're 1 or 2 years ahead of you.
Right.
And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm looking at the wrong people. I'm following all these like real estate flippers and wholesalers and whatnot." Oh, and I was still like watching a whole bunch of YouTube videos on short-term rentals just to get some knowledge and so on. And I'm like, if I'm going to do this, I really should be looking more over here than over here. So all of a sudden, that switch was there's so much more available. And I took a few extra courses, some extra training and coaching, and all of a sudden, it's like, this is what I want to do now.
Yeah.
And then it all of a sudden it kind of creates its own, I don't know, like gravity. Once you realize this is what you want to do, and then that's the path that you're going to go down, all of a sudden everybody recognizes that and I started getting leads and deals and people coming to me. So
Well, I kind of I'll use my terminology here. Like, you kind of went all in on it,
I did go all in, a hundred
right?
percent. Yeah.
And like, how do you though? Like, and I think this is like, I'm curious about this from like the video game days and in what you're doing now. How do you, as a business owner, avoid shiny object syndrome? Because it is a real thing that can happen. People can introduce a new business idea, a new topic, a new strategy, a new income
Yeah.
source. I find it hard. So I'm curious what advice you could give to other people of like, how do you avoid the shiny objects that might distract you from the thing that you've maybe decided to go all in on?
So I would say last year, I had a couple of shiny objects that I was still on because I mean when you're dealing with property flipping, you wind up getting all these leads and you're looking at months uh, towards ending things. And I had one deal that the market changed, the deal went south. I had to walk away. It was a very costly set of shoes that I had to put on to walk away.
Right.
But as part of all that, I realized like in order for me to do what I do, I need to just follow a path, and it's boring. I'll say this. It is boring because shiny objects are always exciting. But I
Right.
learned this with video games. Um a long time ago, is that the first 30% of creating any video game is the most exciting time, because it's like, could you think of, you're playing with your imagination, you're saying, let's try this, let's try that, I want to combine this game and that game, it's going to be Call of Duty meets I don't know, some other game, Forza Horizon. And like whatever it is, like you're putting different ideas together and you're playing around with it. It's really exciting. And then it gets down to the execution, and that's the part that separates the winners from the losers. I've seen so many people who come up with really great game ideas, but then, oh, then it's work.
Right.
And then they get tired and they get bored and they love that playful nature of the first part. The thing is, there's a reward at the end of that tunnel. Once you go through all that effort and putting all these games together, then all of a sudden you get to the point where you can start testing what the final product is going to look like. And now that final product could be bang on with exactly what you were planning for. It could be totally different. But all of a sudden you've created, this is where a lot of people, this is the part that I get the most excited by, because you've created something out of your own mind and translated it into hand controls, your visual inputs, everything else that's going on. And then when virtual reality, that was a whole other thing. But you've created something out of nothing. So I take a look at the short term rental space. Very similar is that I had this idea of, like, I was going to buy these properties and slowly convert them over, and now it's like, well, that's not fast enough. I want to have hundreds, right, of these places. So like recently, Phoenix, Arizona, we went down, picked up six. We're finishing those off. They'll be launching very shortly, hopefully within about a week or two. Hopefully in about a week. But it's six. I need more. I love them. I love the interaction with people. I love being able to provide a safe, affordable place for them to sleep and to stay and to entertain and to build memories in. I love all of that. I love the team that I've built up to be able to handle all these things. And that's been sort of a very, there's been a learning curve behind that as well. Um, yeah, and it's just, like going from nothing of, I had one and I just didn't want to have a long-term renter, into, okay, now I want to have a very large, successful business focusing on short-term rentals.
When you talk a lot about things that you love with the aspect, let's get
Yep.
a little negative. Um, what don't you like about trying to be an entrepreneur and a business owner? What's the things that just annoy you, maybe frustrate you, or just like, "Oh, sometimes this sucks." Like what annoys you as a business owner?
Uh, so, you know, I'll be blunt. Shit rolls downhill.
Yeah.
If I'm a terrible leader, if I'm having a crappy day, it's actually better if I just tell my team I'm busy rather than trying to talk to them, because that's when problems start occurring.
Right.
Um, I being the entrepreneur, being the leader, you have nobody else to go to, right?
True.
There's nobody above you to say, I don't want to do this, you do it,
Yeah.
right? And you need that break sometimes, but there's nobody there to give you that break.
Well,
So either I have to give myself permission to do that, or I have to find somebody like yourself or other leaders in their own industry, people who are at the top of their game, and say, "Oh my gosh, it's lonely at the top. I'm having a tough day. People
right.
don't understand." And I can't tell that to my team. Like, that's not a cool thing, right? It kind of will deflate their morale. I want to keep them up and lively and spirited.
Of course.
We had a pretty uh, not a catastrophe, but we actually had one of my assistants got injured. Or what was it, last week? Actually, it was on the day I was flying down to Phoenix, Arizona, and yeah, she got into a motorcycle accident. I'm like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. And then she sent me photos. Like, yeah, you're definitely not okay. But the
Right.
team came together and like took care of her, so that she can go off and rest and relax. And now she's feeling better. She's coming back and she's going to help them.
Yeah.
Right. So I was really amazed just to be able to like, cause I had like 30 minutes, the plane's boarding. I can't really do much,
Right.
but I was thrilled to be able to have that kind of handle itself. And I was very lucky to have that culture built in
Well,
to
I
this
think that's the
particular
important piece,
business.
like you building that right culture, having the right people, but it's also challenging to sometimes find the right people as well.
Oh yeah, totally.
Right? And you know
Yeah.
about that a little bit too, like, and just like hiring and training is challenging. Speak to me about that. Like, what does someone need to kind of show for you to say, hey, this might be a good fit for someone to work with?
So I've learned a long time ago I could hire a rock star, but rock stars have tantrums like
Okay.
rock stars. They're gonna go out there and be sometimes they'll be leading with an ego. Sometimes they'll be leading or excluding team members because well they can't do what I do, so I'm gonna do this stuff. Um, there's a lot of issues I found with rock stars, and it's actually I'd much rather have people who have the attitude and the aptitude of being trainable.
Right. That's so important.
I'd rather hire on personality than talent. I can teach skills every day of the week, but I can't teach somebody who's unteachable.
Right.
So I need them to be open. So I actually like one of my assistants who works with me never did anything in short-term rentals before. The other ones have, but this guy he has not. But he came with a different flavor on how he was doing everything. So it's actually and he's quite trainable, quite open to new ideas, and he's been like just great at doing his job. So having yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things that I look for is skills. I mean, nobody's born with knowing rocket surgery, right? You have to
No, of
learn
course
how to
not.
become a rocket surgeon.
It's like that trainability piece is so important. And I think that definitely in my experiences too, it's like if you don't set somebody up to win and train them the right way, well, then you're setting yourself up for failure and pretty painful situation as well.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And like I have actually made the wrong hire multiple times. And it's been every time I've done it, it's like, should I or shouldn't I? Ah, yeah, I really like this guy. I'm going to hire them. I really like this girl. I think she's going to be great. And then it's no, it's not. And I've hired them for the wrong reasons. And that's
Right.
what I always pay for.
What keeps you motivated as an entrepreneur and a business owner? Like, what's the big, I guess, why for you that really keeps you going in this space? Because let's be honest, right? It can be very tough at times to be a business owner.
Mhm.
And at times you mentioned, there's loneliness aspect to it as well. There's probably some stress. What keeps you going through the bad shit to hopefully get through the good stuff? Like, what is that?
Well, I think it comes down to a couple of different things. Number one, when a lot of people when you ask them what their why, the super, I think it's more of a superficial answer. It's going to be they never want to work for somebody, or which I've already said, or it's for their family, or they want to leave something for the kids, something like that. I think it actually goes a little bit deeper, for a lot of people. Um, Two things that kind of keep me motivated is number one, I'm always hungry. I always want another thing to like I want that success, but in order to get it, I have to work as hard as I can in order to get there. So I try to be the hardest worker in the room only because I'm so driven in order to accomplish what other people haven't. Have I gotten there? Probably not. No, I wouldn't say that. But that's why I'm still hungry is because I haven't gotten there. I haven't come across like we're all climbing our own mountain, right? But I feel like I'm only at the base of Mount Everest right now. I want
Right.
to be up at the top where the guy is like planting the flag saying nobody's ever been here before and I survived,
Right.
right? I want to be that person on top of that mountain. Um and then number two is like, like you have all of these things where I I try to picture what my ideal life is going to be like,
Okay.
and and I don't have that. Therefore, what changes can I make today? What small change can I make today in order to make that happen in my future existence. So past Keith is always looking for how can I help out future Keith.
I love that. I'm curious, and I'm going to get a little personal here on this question.
Yeah.
Um, when you are trying to make decisions on the business, say bigger decisions on what you're trying to do strategically, how much do you involve your wife in the conversation to talk through here where I'm going to go? Is it a separation, like it's like personal professionals out, or do you talk through big decisions together? I'm curious, and I think that would help other people who are maybe going through this entrepreneurial journey to understand, like, hey, how does someone else do it?
Yeah. So and that's funny because I've looked at a lot of other spouses too who've done this kind of thing. And so you do have spouses who work together, you have spouses who will work and like you can bounce ideas off. And my wife is very open to that, but she's also got her own shit going on. So
Right,
she doesn't like, if I'm thinking, hey, what do you think about if I open up short term rentals in Bali? Yeah, yeah, whatever. Just do your thing.
right,
And it's not that she's like dismissive, it's she's busy with her own thing, and we haven't really connected on it. But every so often, like when I talk to her about these sort of like the decision about going into the US, I'm like, okay, I gotta build some US corporations, I gotta get the right accountant, I gotta do this and do that. She was like, well, you already have your accountant who can help you out, so there's a big win. And then
yeah,
you already know what you're going to do, and what's the difference? The only and working down in the States, you get to bring back a little extra money at the same time. Hmm, okay, so supportive.
yeah,
Uh, you know, she's not in particular. I wouldn't say my wife is like. I've always thought supportive meant, oh yeah, be the cheerleader and
right.
rock on, go do your thing. No, supportive is day to day going through the grind with me and saying, okay, you're going to have some tough times, you're going to have some hard times, and you're going to have some great times. Let's get through the shit so we can have the great times later.
Well, and I think I'll just give from my example. Like, I think it's important to have the conversation when you try and launch into something like a new business venture to make sure that you're on the same page, because there is a lot of sacrifice in terms of time that
Mhm.
happens as well, right?
Yeah.
And so it's finding those moments to also like, hey, this is not going to be work time. This is us time is a critical component to it as well, which can be hard,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. You're traveling to Arizona maybe to set some stuff up. Well, then how do you balance that out back at home as well? And that's a tricky thing to navigate.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, a wise person once told me to start like scheduling in more date nights, and
Wow,
so I
that's
have.
smart.
Yeah, smart guy. I don't know who he was.
Yeah, I don't either.
Um, so yeah, actually, like I made sure that when I came back, we had a date night. So we're have a date night this weekend. Yay.
Which is important, right? Just to find
Yeah.
that balance for yourself.
Yeah,
Um,
and I use and like, my wife is also of the opinion, like she said to me once, "Why are you asking me? You're just gonna do what you want to do anyway." And
yeah.
but it's like do I have your permission? Or like I don't want permission, but I want you to be on the same page as me, that I'm doing this for these reasons to do this thing. But I also want you to be a part of it because I want you to be like I want this success to be ours, not just mine.
Yeah. It's not just me, it's we kind of deal, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So if you think about whether it's someone past, present, famous, not famous, etc., who would you love to have dinner with? Who's maybe someone that you could pick their brain and have an inspiring conversation with in this business building space that could really just you think that would help you a lot, dead or alive, whoever they are. Who's somebody you just would love to connect with?
I don't think it would just be one person. It would be people like um, Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, people who are incredibly driven and passionate about what they want to do. Like, I would love to sit down with Sylvester Stallone and say, when you shopped around your movie 100 different places and they all said no, what made you keep going at 101
Yeah.
to get Rocky made? Right. Or Arnold Schwarzenegger, he talks about just that passion, that desire, that idea of he had a dream and a vision and he made it happen multiple times, whether it was in Mr. Olympia, whether it was in acting, or whether it was in government.
Yeah.
He couldn't become the president of the United States because he was born in Austria, but he would have if he was had the opportunity,
Right.
and he would have made it.
That's
So
kind of cool though. I'm not sure. I didn't know where you were going to go with that, but you're picking, yeah, some movie stars and some sports stars to kind of, get some inspiration from. That's really cool.
yeah, so I'll give you a sort of a daily how I wake up and I get started with my day is that so when I work out in my basement, and when I'm working out, I actually watch a YouTube channel called Mulligan Brothers.
Mhm.
And Mulligan Brothers has a lot of motivational videos.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly have that on repeat. There's a few different videos that I constantly repeat because it's the message that I really, motivation is like having a shower. It's great when you have it, but then eventually by the end of the day, it wears off. So you need to do it again.
Wow, I've never heard it that said that way before. That makes a ton of sense.
Exactly, right? Like motivation is great, but you need to remind yourself
Yeah.
repeatedly about it. And it's those messaging. Like Will Smith is one of those amazing guys who I'd love to sit down. Now his life's it's a little bit of a jumble,
Sure.
but prior to even his marriage going south, I still think he has a lot of amazing things to say. He's not a
Yeah.
bad person at all by any stretch of the imagination in my eyes, but I think he would be great. If you want to talk to other artists, I'd love to sit down with Prince and Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
Like these are people who are so dedicated to their craft. They are the ones who said shiny object. Don't even know what that is.
Right. That's amazing. Well, Keith, how can people work with you if they wanted to partner in some capacity? They want to learn more about you. How do they best find out more information about you or potentially work with you? And like, who do you work with, really?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I am very particular with the people that I work with. I do like I'm happy to take on properties if they fit the bill, right? There's certain criteria that I need to make sure that I'm being able to get that property up to. And I'm always looking at new properties, whether I'm going to be arbitraging them or even managing. Managing is a very tough one though, because I have to have not only the right property, but I have to have the right values shared with that owner.
Right.
That if they're not seeing my vision and they're not sharing that vision, I can't work with them. So it's usually like the people who are my friends I find are the ones who I actually work with the most in that regard. But I mean, there's so many different ways uh, to get into it. I mean, I've worked with a couple of people where they've provided me with the funds to leverage into a new property, and then we split the proceeds. Right? There's ways to leverage into this in different ways, or like you can just borrow money and capital because it is a capital intensive business. I mean, you have all this furniture, you have first and last month's rent, security deposits, utilities that sometimes have to get paid, like landscaping and maintenance. And then on top of that, you also have all kinds of other little weird supplies that you're going to be putting into the properties. And
And
then
cleaning companies and stuff you got to partner with. And
exactly.
yep.
So there's all these transactions that are going through, and you have to have a bit of a window or a runway in order to make sure that you're going to be okay for the next few months, so that you're trying it out. And like every so often, properties get into a position where they're no longer profitable.
Mhm.
So like this week, I'm closing down. One property is mine, and then I do have another one which is a management property, but it was the partner with that one didn't have the correct information from the condo corp when they launched it, and now the condo corp has come back months later saying no, you got to close this down. So
Mm.
we're closing that one down at the end of the week as well.
So then, if someone wants to connect with you, I obviously am putting on the screen here, but for those who are listening, Airbnb Keith on Instagram. Yeah, obviously you're posting some content there about some of the activities and the deals that you're doing. The website as well that they could go and find more information on about
Yeah,
you.
Yeah, so they can go to garnetwpm.com, which is basically it just shows some of the different ways that we can partner together. But it's very flexible too. Like I'm very open to all kinds of deals. I was just talking with somebody earlier today about some properties in Florida, and so we're starting to, just at the very beginning, explore different options that way. Um, and then, if people if they're more into Facebook, I do have a Facebook page with my name, Keith. I think it's Keith.Makse. I don't know how to navigate Facebook pages.
Yeah, I hear
Even
you.
though I'm old, I don't know how Facebook works. So,
Right. So, what are some final thoughts or words that you want to share with either people who are interested in the short-term rental space or would-be entrepreneurs? What kind of parting message would you like to kind of to end with here for them?
so I think for like anybody who was looking to get into short-term rentals, is find somebody who's already done it and like tag team partner with them, do something if you can. I think a lot of people are very open to it. There's so much opportunity out there. It's kind of incredible. Um, but for entrepreneurs, stop thinking it and just do it. I have constantly thought of myself as somebody who saw a limit and I try to break through. Like I don't try to break through, I try to run past it. It's like a finish line. You never
Right.
see a runner stop at a finish line. You always see them run through it. And this
True.
is the way I look at any activity, is that you have to just make that decision to go through, and then all of a sudden that momentum is going to keep you moving forward. And then it also creates like I kind of think of it like planets. So you have this gravity swell and all of a sudden the smaller planets start following you and supporting you, and now you become this bigger and bigger thing. There's this really cool Japanese game called Katamari Damacy, um, where you start off really small and you have this little ball that you're rolling over stuff, and like you're collecting things out of the world. And as you get bigger and bigger, like you start rolling up from like thumbtacks and pennies to, you know, small children and bicycles, and then later on buildings and mountains and castles.
Right.
So it's that kind of momentum that kind of starts creating. And if you can maintain the momentum, all of a sudden you're going to have this large, powerful business behind you that you never thought that you could ever imagine.
Well, I think that you're a great example of that, Keith, and like just generating that momentum, putting in the work and the action, and continuing to build. Like I find it fascinating every time I talk with you. I'm like, oh, what do you got going on? You're like, well, I've just got this many more units, or I'm in this area, or in this spot, or this country. Like I think that's the cool thing, and I think that's inspiring. So again, if people want to work with Keith, follow him on Instagram, Airbnb Keith. He does have Facebook and a LinkedIn presence, and then obviously he's got his website as well. But thank you again, Keith, for being on the show today. It's amazing how fast these conversations go as well. It went really, really quickly, but you imparted a lot of great value. So again, thank you for being on the show today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I think it's what you're doing is great, and helping people out on their entrepreneurial journey, and showcasing other people like myself, or like I said, Alex. I know he was on your show recently. Um, are just examples of what you're trying to let people be aware of. Like, don't wait for the universe to give you permission, because the universe ain't giving you squat. You just It already gave you permission because you were born. Just go out, grab that brass ring, and ride the rails. It's amazing, the whole trip. I know I mixed a whole bunch of metaphors in there, but
But there was a ton of metaphors and a ton of value. Again, just absolutely amazing. So, again, thank you, Keith, for being on the show. And listeners, if there's anything that you can really take away from this, I think that is so important to remember is generate that momentum. Whatever you do, just stop thinking about it. Just do it. Go all in. Again, until next time, thanks, everyone. And again, keep pushing forward and keep trying to live life on your terms.